Hi, good evening, everyone. It's good to be here again. Some folks may be having problems on Facebook this evening for some unknown reason. There's some problem with my Instagram account, and I hardly use it. And my account has been suspended. So I have sent out a couple of notes to one or two people about Facebook this evening. So there may be a problem. So yeah, I'm not too sure how to contact people on Facebook because I can't access it, but I have contacted people who I know on WhatsApp or LinkedIn. So welcome this Tuesday evening. I'm just waiting for my person to let me know whether or not we are good to go. Well, there's two folks, and I think that's okay. We'll just wait for my sound engineer to let me know on YouTube that I'm okay, good to go. Or if anybody else, you may not have mentioned, even made any comment before, but if you just want to say, I'm here, you don't need to say your name or anything like that. That's fine, just to let you know. Anyway, this evening we'll be looking at soul shattering. We're continuing our series on moral injury. Certainly you'll see my articles and my posts in terms of moral injury originated from war, returning soldiers. However, it doesn't just happen in war, as I'll be sharing this evening. There's a little bit more to it than that. So I'm not receiving, there's some problems with my thing this evening. So I'm going to carry on anyway. People may know how to get me on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter if you're on. So there they live things. I might actually cancel the Instagram thing because I don't use it much, to be honest, and I know that's where the place to be, and it might be an opportunity for me to reset it and so forth. Anyway, I'm going to crack on with it this evening. So soul shattering, another viewpoint. So we've looked at this whole thing around values and so forth, but my name is Delroy Hall. I'm a trained psychotherapist, counselor, teacher, and just doing these. Now, these sessions really just hints and tips to help you through some of life difficulties. However, they are no substitute for you to make an appointment with a doctor, or to see a psychologist, or to see a counselor, or to see somebody that will, or even a life coach that will help you through the difficult situations in life. So these are just kind of hints and tips. And moral injury, it started off in terms of returning soldiers from Vietnam, but we now understand that there's many people experience moral injury. Part of the problem is historically, and certainly that sometimes moral injury is confused for burnout. People are not burnt out, but they've experienced moral injury. This whole thing about clash of values. You see something, can't do anything about it, or you don't do anything about it, and there's a real shift in your values and so forth. So I just want to read this quote to start off this evening. The quote, as some of you may be you engaged with my articles, and thank you very much for doing so. Gosh, this is really quiet, you know. I just see a couple of eyes on the thing, so this is really quiet. Normally by now Facebook will be up and running, and I don't know what's happened. I am in contact with somebody on Facebook, and they're meant to get back to me in a couple of days' time, so hopefully it'll be sorted for next week. But if not, this may actually help me to kind of fast forward what I need to be doing in terms of my website and so forth, but I'll keep you posted. So here's a quote. Soul shattering means an event or an act impacts your psyche in such a devastating and harmful way that it impairs your ability to function for a significant time period and leaves you deeply scarred or deeply changed forever, ... And some people never, ever recover. That's the thing. And what people are trying to do, they're attempting to describe this real traumatic experience that many people experience. And there's a whole quote. And when I put the term soul shattering, I remember writing that maybe by some people seeing their word soul might actually put them off, because some people don't believe we have a soul. And I'm not here to discuss whether we have or not. I have a particular view on that. However, what the psychologists and the writers and the therapists are trying to do, they're trying to articulate the depth of the experience to the point where it's more than just the PTSD. It's something very deep within our humanity, And language, it seems to be quite constrictive, except we use the word soul because it's talking to something deep within. We could say values, we could use other descriptions, but the word soul is used. One of the things I will say, though, sometimes soul has reference to religion and all that type of thing. But what I will say very clearly, that we are all believers, meaning that we all believe in something. Whether you believe the moon is round, green, full of cheese and mice are running up and down it, we all believe in something. So as human beings, we are believers, whether we believe in a deity, whether believers not a deity, whether believe whatever we believe, we are believers. As human beings, we are believers. So this kind of this psychological distress happening at a deep level within people's lives, disrupting how they function. And really, as Jonathan Shea, the psychiatrist who framed the coin moral injury, he said it was that led many people to take their own lives. They couldn't deal with what they'd seen on the battlefield that really kind of disrupted their way of being. So one may have faith in a higher power. However, as I said, we all understand that whether spiritual, religious or not, or secular, there are certain things that we have been taught to do. We've been socialized right across the globe. And these are particular values that we will hold. And right across the globe, they're kind of 5 core values, right across the tribes, civilizations, societies, communities, families, 5 particular values that we have: kindness, honesty, loyalty, responsibility, and courage. I'll just say that again: kindness, honesty, loyalty, responsibility, and courage. These are kind of 5 values that are kind of consistent right across the globe, wherever we should go in terms of how we function as human beings. For this talk, though, spirituality for me means search for meaning, purpose, and direction in one's life. That's what I'm talking about. Whether it's religious or not, there's a sense that for all of us, why we're here, what's the purpose, what's the meaning, and how do we find direction, especially when something so much so has happened. So this another viewpoint of moral injury, this soul shattering. Diana Silver wrote in this article, Beyond PTSD, Soldiers Have Injured Souls. So there was an acknowledgement of PTSD, but also there was something else happening far deeper and greater than PTSD. So so she had this idea, and she says, a deep soul wound that pierces a person's identity, sense of morality, and relationship to society. In short, and I really like what she says. She said that the threat is in a soldier's life. PTSD is something that happens outside of a soldier's life or outside of somebody who's been injured. Yes, Sonia, listen, I said right at the beginning, and I did send you something on LinkedIn. I don't know if Facebook has suspended my account. They said something to do with Facebook, but the name that they are saying is my account is not my account at all. The last week, I've received some crazy messages and abusive messages from people. Not too abusive, but things which are kind of random to me, because 2 weeks' time is 4 years since I've been doing this, and to be honest, there's only a couple of times I've had 1 or 2 individuals who said something might have been off center a little bit, but nothing untoward. So yeah, so it's suspended tonight, Sonia, and I don't know why. I've got no idea why. Facebook have contacted me, but I'll watch it, and hopefully they did say I contacted them this morning. They did say they're going to get in contact with me in the next couple of days just to get it sorted. But it's to do with the Instagram account, which I hardly use, but it might be an opportunity now to close it down and restart it. So then I've got an Instagram account with Dr. Delroy Hall and not my other signature on Facebook. Anyway, glad to see you this evening, and glad that you're receiving it loud and clear. So we're looking at soul shattering. We're looking at moral injury, another perspective. So we've looked at kind of the body and so forth, but these Diana Silver has looked at a particular perspective, saying that soldiers carry a kind of injury. And what I really liked about her quote, and I'll just say this for somebody who may be joining, and also just want to say a huge thank you for those of you who are engaging with my written articles. Really appreciate it, and I'd love to have a conversation with you about them. But I know that we're all busy and there's a whole stream of stuff out there. But if you can, but please do. And certainly I appreciate those who are reacting or loving, or the insightful icon, or actually engaging. I just appreciate all forms of interaction with the work I'm doing. Hopefully you find it helpful to help you. So Diana Silver talks about soul shatter as a deep soul wound that pierces a person's personality, sense of morality, and relationship in society. In short, and I said I really like this, it's a threat in a soldier's life, which is different from PTSD, which is a threat outside of the soldier's life, where he or she may get triggers and they react. This moral injury is within, and it's a threat within that's causing so much problems. However, it's quick to point out that many writers are saying that it's not only war where people experience moral injury, but people who have been abused, rape, violence, and all forms of damage can experience moral injury. So one of the things I said that in the article, that I'm convinced now, and I shared that with some military people recently, that I believe now there's more casualties back home than on the battlefield. What I mean by that is when soldiers return from war, they are usually seldom ever the same individuals. And I remember working with one student whose father had been to Iraq and done some tours in Iraq, came back and she said to me, Delroy, I remember my dad being in the garage hours on his own, just rocking backwards and forwards. A frightening experience for a young child to see your father not communicating, but just rocking backwards and forwards in silence for hours on end. She said it was a frightening time. I don't want to elaborate on the signs and symptoms of moral injury, but one of the things that we do talk about is the robustness of the human spirit. And I make it very clear that as though the human spirit is robust, but there's a level, there's a threshold that we have. And then once we kind of step over that, then there's all kind of damage and so forth. Anyway, I think what I wanted to say, just for those of you who might be interested, during the 70s, there was a series of films on the Vietnam War. One's called Platoon, and one of them is really grim and dark and frightening and horrifying, is Apocalypse Now. And that really, it really reflects on the amount of drugs that soldiers were taking, because they were seeing some things out there, the amount of drugs they were taking and the abuse that went on, but also there was a semi-psychotic colonel. And apparently the budget went 3 times over the amount, and it would cost more than Star Wars. But one of the things that the film is highly noted for, because it really highlights the insanity of war. And then when men or women are experiencing things on the battlefront, which disrupts their value system, and then they have to return home, and sometimes they can't describe some of the sights that they've seen. There's a huge disruption that goes on. And Diana Silver and other people talk about soul shattering or wound of the soul to describe there's something fundamental that is shifted in this human being, and it needs some form of important work. And it's really good that we do that. So, one of the things I want to make mention of is that this whole thing around moral injury or soul shattering is the question I was asking: what must it feel like if you're not in the military, and what must it feel like if you've had experiences that leave you hollow, broken, empty, or even non-human? And I'm going to say this very, very carefully. I've already hinted that it's not only people at war that experience moral injury, but I've had, I can't say honor or privilege, but I've worked with women, mainly women, who have experienced being raped, and the whole experience that, and I always have to say in the work that I'm doing, what are your feelings about working with a man? I always have to say that just to ensure that I'm not taking anything for granted. As far as I know, to this day, no young person has ever said, you know, they don't want to work with me. But it's just something that I have to note, that here's a therapist in the room with the same gender as somebody who did such a horrible thing to you. So this whole experience, leaving people hollow, broken, empty, almost non-human. Going back to this thing around shame. Remember this whole thing around shame, that people don't feel valued or they don't feel loved, or they feel unlovable. These experiences really kind of almost causes the person's inside personality values to disintegrate and to shatter. And I'm kind of struggling with language, but I think you know what I mean, that when these things happen to people, it really disrupts them in a kind of crippling way. We also now have this idea that police, paramedics experience moral injury, but also I might have mentioned last week in brief, moral injury in terms of paramedics, but also medical staff during the COVID crisis, whereby people came unwell and they had to send people home when in fact they signed up as the part of the NHS staff to look after people, care for people, tend to people, all that type of thing, and they had to send people home because of what was happening. So that had an impact on individuals, and I certainly know, working with some individuals who were nurses within the trust, within NHS during the time of the pandemic, and the level of guilt and shame and embarrassment, all that thing that they were experiencing in terms of wanting to care for people, but they couldn't. Another way that moral injury can occur, believe it or not, is you are a dedicated worker. You want to do your best, but you're working in an environment that's toxic and vicious. And the things that you want to do to help people, to help situations, you can't do it. Moral injury can occur that way as well. And I think certainly when I work with individuals, that happens far more than we will ever acknowledge or agree. So it's important to address the symptoms of moral injury. And if they're not, it causes huge problems. But what we do, sometimes we adopt, certainly in the West, we adopt a kind of stoic persona, but then that only lasts for so long, and then things start to fall apart. So the area where they've done fantastic work on this moral injury, this idea of soul shattering, is the Australian Defence Force. And I'm going to spend a bit of time on just going through what some of the categories are, but it's really interesting because the people who had to do the mop-up work wasn't so much the psychologists, but it was the chaplains. When people came back from being on the battlefield, the question was, what does this mean? And certainly for people of faith, what does this mean? And it could be that their faith is shattered. If we have a loving God, how has he allowed this to happen? And then there's, for some people, question whether God exists because this has happened. So it was the chaplains who drew alongside individuals, not an attempt to convert, but an attempt to sit with individuals in their darkness. That's what chaplains do. They sit with individuals in their darkness where there's no words to describe what they've gone through. They sit with them, almost like at times maybe a silent traveling partner who sits with you in your misery, grief and remorse, giving you the opportunity to talk, not held to time, maybe like a therapist or a psychologist. I can only see you for an hour or for 15 minutes, but you stay with that individual. So that's what chaplains do. So the Australian Defence Force, having made sterling attempts in conjunction with obviously chaplaincy and psychological services, developing a way of effectively dealing with moral injury with individuals who've been on the battlefront. Now, it's quite interesting. When I was talking to somebody recently, and he was talking to me about what happens to some soldiers, not all, but some soldiers, when they return home, they don't walk on grass for months. I said, well, why not? Their minds are still fixed to out on the battlefield, landmines, and they won't walk on grass unless there's a kind of, I don't know the proper term, a mine sweeper or mine detector. Months after coming back on British soil, they will not walk on grass because their minds are so attuned to being back, also shifted to being back on the battlefield. So with the aid of chaplaincy and psychological support in Australia, they've developed this 8-session model. Each session lasts between 60 to 90 minutes, so there's no rush. They can explore things with soldiers. It's called the pastoral narrative disclosure, and it's got 3 stages. The pastoral, so we know that's care, and narrative is about telling the story, and the disclosure is about being open and transparent. It seems to me, one of the things I've always said, when things happen, part of our natural thing is to close down, but part of what we have to do is to accept what's happened and learn to kind of articulate it. That's the thing that will really help us to move forward. So the pastoral narrative discourse, there's lots of things that you can check on Google, and in fact I'll say a little bit more right at the very end. So the first part is rapport. So building trust is really important. So the first session, the first 60 minutes, 90 minutes, is just have a conversation so the service member can feel comfortable. It's usually chaplains that do it. Sit with chaplains and just begin to talk about life in general, maybe not so much focusing on what might be causing the problem. The second session will be reflection, where the service personnel, they reflect on their military journey and what's taken place. So there's not this kind of hiding of what's taken place, but this person has a 60 minutes, hour and a half to begin to talk about their journey in the military, but also then to talk about what they've seen that's caused the disruption inside them. That's number 2. Review, number 3, is to examination of the content. So I think this part is almost it's an idea of, what sense you make of all this, what's happening and what sense you make of all this. This is not trying to find out whether it's right or wrong, but just asking the question, how do you understand what's happened? And then you can't tell anybody that's right or that's wrong. It's how we view things. If something happens in the street and there's 10 of you, all of you will have 10. You might see the main thing, but all 10 of you will view it in a nuanced way based on your experience, the way you're socialized, your experience of what it might be, how you view things, how you interpret things. So in one sense, it's all individual. So you can't say to somebody, you shouldn't think or feel like that, because that's exactly what happens. So that's number 3, review. Number 4 is reconstruction. So as I said before, the value base of the individual has been disrupted. So then it's how then do we begin this process of reconstructing the moral and ethical issues relating to the event as a result of moral injury. So something has happened, so we're dealing with the events and the emotions, and then it's how then we begin through confrontation, through dialogue. And I suspect, I don't know if they set homework in between sessions so people can write. It would seem to me quite creative. I don't know whether if people draw things, if their proclivity or their gift is one of drawing, to explain or help to interpret what's taken place. So this idea of reconstruction is really important. Restoration. So grievances are heard by the perpetrator or offending organization. So let me give you an example. One of the things that Jonathan Shea, the psychiatrist, realized was that soldiers, part of the moral injury was soldiers were left out on the battlefield, not enough food, not enough water, guns that didn't work properly. When they were injured, they weren't collected, or the care they got wasn't good, or they weren't collected. So there's almost like a betrayal of the organization for the country in which they went to fight for. There's this whole sense that the organization, the perpetrator, has to hear the grievances of the soldiers, and there has to be some sense of apology. So it's restoration. Now, ritual, that's really important as well. What are we going to do? How are we going to mark what's taken place? Now, religion has had this for centuries. Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, all religions have a sense of ritual. How do we mark this thing that's happened with significance? That's really important. Even humanists they have ways of marking an occasion, because there's a recognition that this event, whether it be marriage or death or birth or whatever it is, this thing is too significant for us just to kind of kick it into touch and just kind of go on as business as usual. We have to mark it with something. So that's whole thing of ritual. One of the things that I was at a conference in Germany, in Cologne, quite a few years ago, and they have a lot of terrorist attacks out there. So they were talking about what happens, and there's a kind of, people go back to the site where there was where there were the terrorist action took place, and a suggestion was made for those who are or Roman Catholics, whether or not they ever thought about serving communion at that site. It's a site of violence, and in my own thinking, that the elements of the communion, the bread and the wine, are symbols of violence, but also symbols of wholeness and peace and so forth. That's another conversation that we can get onto another time if you so wish. So after ritual, so there's rapport, build up conversation, reflection. The person will talk about their military experience and then their moral injury experience. Review and examination of their conscience, what they did, what they believed. Okay, reconstruction, reconstructing what's happened. How then do we make sense of this nonsense, this bizarre stuff that's gone on? The ritual, how do we mark it? How do we signify this really important thing? And then renewal, making amends and engaging in something meaningful in the person's life. So it's almost like that this has happened. So then how can we get to some form of, it's not normality, it can't be normal. It's a new normality. How can they reconstruct their lives, rebuild their lives in a new way? So renewal, making amends and engaging in meaningful activities for the services personnel, linking back in with their community and their family, because you can imagine quite often when people have these moral injuries, there's a kind of detachment from people, from society, from family, communities, and part of healing and restoration is re-engaging with community and so forth. And reconnection. So this whole thing about reconnection then is, how do we tap into the sources so that as we go forward, we reshape our future? Remember, our lives can't be the same. We're now reshaping our future. We have to reshape it because what's happened. So there's a different connection with our family, communities. And also, this is not about just while you're in the sessions, is what are we going to put in place so that a year's time, 2 years time, 3 years time, 4 years time, 5 years time and beyond, we still are moving forward and getting on with our lives. I think life takes on a new meaning. It has to. There's no way we can see some incredible horrors of war, or if a person has been raped or abused or whatever it might be. Life does go on, but life takes on a new meaning, and it doesn't have to be worse than, but it can take on a new meaning. So let me give you an example. In America, certainly veterans who've returned from war have a whole different perspective. So in America, I was talking to somebody, there's Veterans Against War. The person I was talking to, one particular veteran, so they've formed this kind of alliance, this movement, and certainly post 9/11, there's a thing called about face, where military people are standing up against the American government about the armory that they're sending abroad, and this whole about face is this whole resistance move against war. So my friend was telling me that when he did his studies, there's one person who returned from Vietnam, experienced moral injury, was able to kind of work through it, and what he does now as a form of recompense, I think it's either once or twice a week, he goes to visit prisoners on death row. The real kind of people who society has sentenced, who have left, forgotten. It's almost as though there's a form of penance. He goes to the prison, I think it's once or twice a week, and just sits with men and women, usually men who are on death row, in an attempt to kind of make peace with what's taken place. And some of the things that he did, what things have taken place, but to make some form of reconciliation, some form of reconciliation with the things that he's witnessed and seen and done when he was in war, and how can he pay back now with the atrocities that have seen and possibly caused? How can he now pay back to individuals? Obviously, look, I've just zipped through this 8-session model. It would normally be about 15 hours of intense work. It's not kind of, I guess it is therapy, but the person, the service member is able to talk about some very horrific things. The chaplain then has to listen to all this, and it's not about fixing. It really isn't about fixing, but it's how can we reconstruct. So in a sense, like this kind of co-production, how can we reconstruct my values so then I can move on with my life without all the emotional, psychological, and maybe existential stuff that will kind of get in the way. I've just finished off by saying quite clearly, simply as this: one thing is clear, moral injury can't be left. It must be addressed. Failure to do so has long-lasting consequences, and those consequences can be avoided if we act on them. I'm sorry that there wasn't as much engagement as normal this evening. Hopefully I can get my things sorted out for Facebook, but I really don't know. Apologies for individuals. If I can't get onto Facebook, I can't even apologize to individuals, for even those who are silent kind of witnesses who watch each week. But those of you who are able to watch tonight, thank you very much indeed. Those of you that are engaging in my articles, thank you. On the 16th of April is when I celebrate 4 years. Please, if there's testimonials, how it's helped, what you've used, please let me know. DM me or email me on my email, which most of you should know by now, or contact me through LinkedIn or Twitter or on YouTube. Yeah, I'm not really hard to get hold of, not hard at all. Anyway, wish you well. Enjoy the rest of the evening. It's light. Brilliant. It's light. That's fantastic. You'll only get, oh, hang on. Who's this here? All right. Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry about Facebook. Anyway, let's see what happens for next week. Enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your week. Go well. See you next week. Thanks, Af. Thank you. Cheers. Okay, take care, everybody. All the best. Bye-bye.